he will not show up. And there's one condition. So he rarely, because Peking weather is terrible, so he rarely showed up. But every time he showed up, it was an event. Oh, I'm surprised some of you actually showed up, right? This is our first day on the Great Learning and the Doctrine of the Mean. And I'll focus our attention on the Great Learning for this morning. And if we have time, I'll give you a preliminary description of the so-called Doctrine of the Mean, which I translated, as you know, Centrality and Commonality. By the way, this book was published 1976, long before you were born, right? Maybe before your parents were born. But anyway, I did it in, published 1976. Yes, I did it in 1974. And it was revised. But recently, a special issue, a special edition was published in China. In the People's, one of the most prestigious publishers, called the People's Publisher. They decided to do it so they translated the whole thing into Chinese. And then I realized there are a few typos. Any of you read Chinese? No, I say you have to know a little bit of classical Chinese. You do, right? A little bit. Okay, next time if I get extra copies, I'll give you, or you promise to learn Chinese, I'll give you but don't fake it. Another anecdote, I taught a graduate course on Confucian ethics. I only required one midterm paper and the final paper. The midterm paper is only going to help. In other words, if you do it poorly, it will discount it. If you do it well, then it will be reflected in the final grade. One student came in, he said, I understand that in China or Asia, many people memorize the text. I said, not just that text, but 4 books. And he said, instead of writing a paper, is it possible if I can memorize the whole thing? I said, how can you do it? You're second year Chinese. You don't even speak Mandarin. This is a classical Chinese. He said, I will try. So a few days later, I promised, I accepted. A few days later, he came with a tape recorder. He said, will you be able to read it slowly? So I did. Then he went back during the Christmas season. He came back, he said, Professor, I'm ready. Are you sure? Yes. He recited the whole thing from the first character to the end with no mistakes whatsoever. I was very, very impressed. He said, well, I have to walk out of this room. The minute I walk out of this room, I probably forgot more than half of it. But anyway, it's doable. And in fact, at Haverford, this course was taught by a good friend of mine, Paul Desjardins. He's in classical Greek philosophy. He insisted that his students will memorize the first paragraph, the first part. And of course, none of them at Haverford ever studied Chinese. So to get the rhythm, because for your information, this provided the most comprehensive vision of the Confucian idea. And its influence, ever since the time of Hsueh, we'll get a chance to talk about more than 800 years ago, this became the standard text for examination. So every educated person, most of them are men, of course, but also women. There was a women edition of the Great Learning. Everybody totally digested it. And even to this day, this has been one of the most influential books in East Asian culture. And the influence of this is profound. Let me simply give you a sense why we need to really study it carefully. Even today, we talk about East Asian culture, we call it political culture. There are a number of features. One, there's a strong commitment to the government as an agent for not only security, but for subsistence, economic subsistence, and even for prosperity. And finally, the importance of the government as an agent for education. This is very comprehensive. This is true in China, true in Japan, true in Korea, true in Vietnam. This is very different from our conception of what the role of the government ought to be. You know, it's economic, neoclassical economic vision. The idea is you have to undermine the importance of the government as an agent for transformation. Otherwise, economic development will be out of the question. Non-interference, very powerful. Strong government is considered a necessary evil. But all these societies in East Asia, that's why we still distinctive. We try to understand East Asia as a separate culture. And they all accept the view that strong government is good. But a strong government ought to be responsible government and ought to be responsive government. The danger of that, we all know, is that the government may become authoritarian. And sometimes we call it soft authoritarian, like Singapore, and a very strong authoritarian government, like the People's Republic of China. Right? The other feature of East Asian culture now is the importance of Li. This term is sometimes rendered as civility or ritual, and ritual propriety. And it's much more important than law. People interact among themselves according to a code everybody accepts. I call it civility. And then they have difficulty in understanding the importance of law as a way of encouraging people to be good. The law is basically preventive. As a preventive measure, law is constraining, and law is very precise. You will break law, you'll be punished. But civility or li, like ethic or like civil way of human interaction, has a lot of flexibility. For example, you eat in a horrible way. It's called the eating habit is not according to li. But there's a whole range. You know, you can miss the most proper way of eating a little bit. Then it's really horrible. Nobody can tolerate. And that's true with interaction, with talking, with walking, with interacting with people, with answering questions and so forth. So Li is much more flexible. But as a code of ethics, it is deeply rooted in one's own, you don't internalize law, you obey law, but you internalize this ritual in order to act properly. And this is what we call the civility, very different from legality. Another feature in East Asian culture is the primacy of the family. We all know that, filial piety and so forth. Family, the misconception is family consists of certain kind of hierarchical authoritarian mechanism of control. So filial piety meaning being loyal, being obedient to the parents. This is basically misconception. It's highly politicized, misconception. Because, as I pointed out, family is a complex structure, you know, with difference in gender, in age, in authority, in status. And the family ought to be regulated by a reciprocal relationship, two-way traffic. As I pointed out, if there's 7 members or 5 members in the family, if one person is not actively involved in trying to harmonize the family, one person, the family fails. Of course, if the father is abusive, everybody suffers. But if the mother is not responsible, you know, the mother is a drug addict, for example. If the mother is not interested in doing any kind of work, either domestically or outside, everybody suffers. If a son or even daughter decides not to work hard at all, not to collaborate, anyone who is not actively involved, the family fails. So that's the reason everybody is so careful in running the family. If family fails, everybody suffers, no matter what kind of family we're talking about. You know, the family with 2